Доброго вечора, ми з України. Доброго вечора, ми з України. Доброго вечора, ми з України. Доброго вечора, ми з України.
Good. It's what, 11:37, so fucking morning, afternoon, whatever you want to call it. This is review for the 20th of April, 2022. We're all doing well in this time. Hello, fellow kids. It's been a weird couple of days. It's been a weird couple of days. Well, first of all, it was like it was what, like 70 on Saturday, and then the next day, the next 2 days, it was like 40 with lows in the fucking 20s, and it's May on Saturday. That's criminal. Okay, that's criminal. It was April 26th. I had my fucking heater on, and what? I think it was Saturday. I went outside in shorts. This is a good state. Like the northern part of the country is a really good part of the country to be in, Minnesota especially. But the weather recently is just fucked, right? It's I ugh. I want nothing to do with it. Hopefully, it gets better come May. But at the same time, May and June are not always good weather months in this state. All right, either it gets blazing fucking hot. Like I've had Junes that were like 190, 100 degrees Fahrenheit with wicked humidity, so you were sweating like a fucking maniac, breathing air. And um, I've had May and June. This was what, like 7, 9. Fuck me to death with a rig 9 years ago. It was 9 years ago. Middle of June, out of nowhere, it was like 39 degrees. Middle of fucking June. I was at two places, right? I was at two places. Grad party and the local. If you're not from the Midwest, every town in the Midwest has a fucking like festival each summer. Every town in the Midwest mostly had this like Midwest festival with like rides and food and greasy food and crazies and stuff. This one is the local town I live in, and I was freezing to death. Middle of June. It was terrible. Let's hope we never have to experience that again. But it made me want to puke. Right? It made me want to. It made me want to fucking puke. This is another weird month for me too, because I think it was last week was 10. Wow. Last week was 10 years since my senior prom. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. That was a weird time, that senior prom. Uh, I just decided, okay, let's go. I already have formal wear because I was at a wedding the previous summer. But at Sears back when there were still a Sears. Went, took a good friend, had a great time, and that was a that was a time. It was a very 2012 prom because it had all of the shit of like early 2010s, like fashion and music. What was the music there? Like Adele, I think Skrillex, all of the shit you heard in like early 2010s, and fashion. Early 2010s was like the height of like the rented very, very. Let me show you. Let me show you. Wait. This was the this was the fashion back then of these. Let me zoom in even closer to show you how bad it was. They were super fucking baggy. And see how like down here, the pant leg is very big, like probably like a size too big for that leg. The pant leg doesn't fit at all. That that jacket is could fit fucking Jack. Where normally on a suit jacket you want to just barely make it over the hand, not cover the whole fucking thing. Yeah, this is a very odd color too, and very like sheet material. That was the and it that looks like horseshit. That was the style back in 2012, like very out of very bad fitting tuxedos. It was awful. As someone who, there was a time in my life, probably every day, probably twice a week for 5 or 6 years, I dressed up a lot and just, ugh. You gotta learn um, better. So let's go to some news stories, right? So with the war in Ukraine, the fall, the Soviet Union falling 30-ish years ago created a lot of like breakaway parts of of the area, and not only breakaway parts that like wanted to be separate from the country they are absorbed into. Like this one, Transnistria, which is an ethnically Russian part of Moldova, or Abkhazia in Georgia, which has its own ethnic, own language, own religion, etc. A lot of the separatist regions in the Caucasus, like if you've listened to any foreign policy news the past, I don't know, 12 months or so, you've heard of one of them in Azerbaijan in Karabakh. This one is is in the news right now, when normally they aren't. None of them are recognized by the UN, or really considered countries at the main level, like the international level. But Transnistria is in the news right now, because there were bombs exploded there, So some think it is the Russian Federation expanding eastward in its war with Ukraine. Now, will it? I think it will, personally. My own opinion is that they will attack Transnistria and maybe Moldova, but not go any farther westward. So, here's why. Let me show you a map on Google. Here's a brief um, political lesson for you. So, here's Europe, right? There's very much kind of if you discount Ukraine, like a second-ish iron curtain around from Moldova to Belarus of countries that were in the past kind of like like closer to Russia that didn't join NATO. Right? Moldova, well, Belarus did not join NATO because right now it's very tied to the hip. Lukashenko is the leader with Vladimir Putin. But and Moldova isn't because it's staying neutral. It won't go any further. The Russian troops won't, because right here is Romania. So right now they're attacking a lot of southern Ukraine and trying to get to Transnistria, which is over here. Romania is NATO. If you attack a NATO country, they're fucked, and they're not very smart. Ads. So I'll show you this video to talk about it. Can I? Hey, there we go.
Over the last week or so, there have been a series of unexplained explosions in Transnistria, a breakaway region in eastern Moldova run by Russian-backed separatists that borders western Ukraine. Russian politicians have subsequently blamed Ukraine for the violence, and Russian state media has already called for Russian intervention Ukraine for the violence western Ukraine. Russian politicians have subsequently blamed Ukraine for the violence.
Not surprising.
And Russian state media has already called
RIA Novosti is one of the many Russian propaganda arms in the country. It's along there with Rossiya Сегодня, Russia Today, or Sputnik as like the main arms of the Russian Federation. Sputnik and Rossiya Сегодня are like the international arms of Russian propaganda in the West. Right? So you have never seen horseshit until you've seen Russian propaganda. Like, it is truly something to behold. right? And it is something to behold because of how much. I mean, maybe this is. I mean, this is typical of state media to obviously portray the nation as like a strong arm of the state, but also you would be surprised at how much Russian propaganda paints like the war in Ukraine as like this holy war against the West. That per Russian state media, the troops are there bombing the shit out of Ukraine, out of especially eastern Ukraine, to liberate the Donbass and denazify Ukraine. I am not even joking. They had an article, Ria Novosti, in Russian. It's been translated a lot, and it's on Medium. That's even worse than that.
For Russian intervention.
Also, a lot of Russian state media, especially so, last weekend was Orthodox Easter. There's two calendars in the Christian tradition. There's Gregorian, which is most churches in the West, save some Orthodox and some Eastern Catholics. I'm about to sneeze. Hold on. Hold on. Nope. So there's two calendars in the Christian tradition, Gregorian and Julian. One is by the east, one is by the west. One is used by the east, and one is used by the west, mostly. And by east, it's like Russian Orthodox, the Orthodox churches in the east, and the Catholic churches in the east, so like the Ukrainian Catholic Church, etc. And for Easter or Pascha, they are a week apart. And the liturgy, the Pascha service in the Orthodox, it's beautiful, but it's very long. And it involves a lot of candles. So you're standing there because it's combining Holy Saturday, the day Jesus was in the tomb, and Easter Sunday. And you're there for 3 or 4 hours because you light the darkness. They sing the Paschal hymn, and then go into kind of Easter Divine Liturgy, like Easter Mass of sorts. And the one on Russia Today, on Россия Сегодня, pronounce it like it's Ukrainian. That's a long story for another day. I'll just talk about it now. A brief language lesson. Brief language lesson when you're dealing with propaganda. Before we go on, just so I get it out of the way. This letter in Russian, it's a G, but in Ukrainian, which I'm learning right now, it's a H. So in Russian today is Сегодня. In Ukrainian, it's Sodny. So I've been pronouncing it. Anyway, also state media it's very good at portraying their leader very almost infallibly, almost godlike. So the liturgy, the Paschal liturgy in Orthodox Church is very long. It's 4 hours long. And it's combining 2 days, and And you start in darkness. You light a candle with everyone there, and you have the Paschal Divine Liturgy, and you're sitting in line. The liturgy in Russia at the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow. It's a very beautiful church. It's aired on Russian state media. I've seen it before. And Putin is always there. holy Christian nation of Russia, And if you look at state media, I want to see where I can find it. He seems to be there for a bit. And then, okay. Yes, it is. Using an old image of Putin to give this, a veneer. It's kind of hilarious. It's very typical of state media. No data mail. Anyway, this is very typical of Russian state media, Russian propaganda. Back to the video.
In Transnistria to try and protect its ethnic Russian population. So in this video, we're going to take a look at whether Russia actually will claim Transnistria, and if it does, what might happen next.
Also, I know I go off on tangents, but I like tangents. TLDR is a great news source. It really is a phenomenal YouTube account.
We actually first discussed this story in Tuesday's Daily Briefing. That's the show where we go through the 5 most important news stories each day, giving you a rundown of everything you need to know around the world in a matter of minutes. Watch on the separate TLDR Daily YouTube channel or listen by searching in your favourite podcast app. So before we get into the recent developments, a quick bit of context. We actually did a full video on Transnistria a while ago, exclusively on Nebula. But for those of you who don't know, Transnistria is a region in the east of Moldova that's been de facto independent from Moldova proper since the collapse of the Soviet Union. In late 1989, after the Moldovan SSR declared the official language to be Moldovan, ethnic Russians in Moldova massed in Transnistria, and a year later declared themselves a separate Soviet republic, called the Pridnestrovian Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic. Gorbachev, however, annulled the declaration. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, Moldova claimed Transnistria as part of Moldova, but the Transnistrians, unsurprisingly, didn't agree, and a war broke out. Since then, little progress has been made. Moldova still claims Transnistria as its own, but Transnistria essentially acts as an independent separate state, with its own currency, passport, and parliament. While Russia, like most of the international community, doesn't formally recognize Transnistria's independence, it does maintain special relations with the region. Russia is Transnistria's biggest export market, and since 2005, Russia has provided free gas to the region, while also providing pensions to about 150,000 Transnistrians. Russia also maintains a permanent military presence in the region of about 1,500 peacekeepers, and performs regular military exercises, which Russia claims are about maintaining stability in the region. Russia even opened a consulate there in 2012, despite the complaints of the Moldovan government. Not that the local people likely care, because a massive majority of Transnistrians reject Moldova and favour a cession into Russia proper. In fact, a 2006 referendum found that 98% of Transnistrians were in favour of potential future accession into Russia, and every Transnistrian leader since the Soviet Union has expressed support for eventual Russian accession. So you get the idea. Transnistria is a pro-Russian separatist state with special economic, military, and political relations with Russia. So perhaps it's unsurprising that since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, many analysts have expressed concerns that Transnistria could be Putin's next target. And while things have definitely escalated recently, a Russian invasion of Moldova was always on the card. After all, Transnistria is like Donbass in many respects. It's a pro-Russian separatist state with a permanent Russian military presence, about which Russia has expressed concerns about the cultural oppression of ethnic Russians. So it certainly looks pretty similar. And only last year, the Moldovan Supreme Court struck down a language law passed by pro-Russian Moldovan MPs, giving the Russian concerns about the Donbass of Moldova was always on. While things have definitely escalated recently, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, many analysts have expressed concerns that Transnistria could be Putin's next target. And while things have definitely escalated recently, a Russian invasion of Moldova was always on the card. After all, Transnistria is like Donbass in many respects. It's a pro-Russian separatist state with a permanent Russian military presence, about which Russia has expressed concerns about the cultural oppression of ethnic Russians. So it certainly looks pretty similar. And only last year, the Moldovan Supreme Court struck down a language law passed by pro-Russian Moldovan MPs, giving the Russian language special status. And last week, the Moldovan Parliament passed a law banning the orange and black striped ribbons of St. George, often used by Russia as a way to show public support for the government and the military, as well as the pro-war Z symbol. It's not just this, though. Annexation of Transnistria would be consistent with Putin's new Russia policy, a historical region that apparently informs Putin's imperial ambitions. And in fact, you might even remember that in early March, Belarusian President Lukashenko presented a map indicating that Russia would be launching an offensive against Ukraine from Transnistria, suggesting that Transnistria was always meant to play a role in this war. At the time, Belarusian officials claimed this was just a mistake, and no offensive has been staged from Transnistria just yet, but things certainly have heated up in the last few days. That's because in mid-April, after Lavrov announced that Russia had begun, quote, Phase 2 of the special military operation, a senior Russian commander said that the goal of Russia's new offensive was to seize control of southern Ukraine and gain access to Transnistria. And another military official raised the issue of oppression of Russian speakers in Transnistria, in the context of Russia's military campaign in Ukraine. Then, on Monday, talk turned to action, with Transnistria's state security ministry in Tiraspol being shelled by a grenade launcher. Then, a day later, on Tuesday, there are explosions at 2 radio towers broadcasting Russian state media. The same day, Russia launched a missile strike against a bridge connecting Odessa and neighbouring Romania, presumably in order to limit Ukraine's ability to defend against an attack launched from Transnistria. And there are even reports that Transnistrians have received texts claiming that Russia was invading Transnistria, which was strenuously denied by Ukraine. Anyway, both Transnistria and Russia have blamed Ukraine for the violence, and on Wednesday, Transnistria accused Russian security forces of drone attacks against the country. In reaction, Transnistria declared a red level of terror threat for 15 days, as well as stepping up security checks on roads and on its frontier with Moldova, and cancelling a parade which was set to commemorate their World War II victory on May 9th. A Russian
Sorry for the weird pausing, but May 9th is actually a day in Russia that they commemorate. Commemorate with quotes, by the way. It's not a day to commemorate the war dead of World War II. And with Russia, that was a metric fuck ton of World War II dead. So it's a day. It's also the day, by the way, if you look up. If you look this up, the day they originally wanted, according to Russian media, the special operation to be over. So this is all very very interesting. But what May 9th is the Memorial Day parade of quotes in not only Russia, but I believe also it's in some countries with a lot of like a Russian population, like maybe the Baltics or Israel has a very large Russian population. Look this up. Yep, it is observed by some other countries in the Warsaw Pact and Israel, which is interesting.
Russian state media outlet subsequently published an article claiming that the West was trying to destroy Moldova.
This is not true, and even then, Moldova is neutral, right? But ready to fight. I'm guessing the West has to be prepared to potentially defend Moldova, even if it's not NATO. We have to be ready to protect Moldova. So Putin, being the idiot he is, does not go into NATO territory.
And a Russian tabloid claimed that the US was trying to open a second front in Transnistria to help Ukraine. Unsurprisingly, Ukraine denied responsibility for the attacks, and Moldova blamed it on internal factions within Transnistria, who disagree over the war with Ukraine. In reaction to all of this, though, Moldova held its own Security Council meeting on Tuesday, where they agreed to step up patrols and vehicle checks near the buffer zone with Transnistria, as well as imposing regular security checks on critical infrastructure. You get the idea then. There's been a notable uptick in violence in Transnistria just a few days after Russian military officials started talking about the oppression of its local Russian population and the possibility of a land bridge into the region.
That's actually the oppression of Russians. That's one of the talking points from Russian state media of the war in Ukraine. Because so this is Ukraine. There is very much an east-west divide. So this is eastern Ukraine along this line. Here's Kiev, here's Lviv, here's Ivano-Frankivsk, Crimea. What you think of it here? So the east-west divide is very much that eastern Ukraine has way more Russian speakers than Ukrainian. More ethnic Russian than Ukrainians. There are people here in eastern Ukraine who only speak Russian. And according to, Russian state media, like Russian 24, Россия сегодня, РИА Новости, the Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine and here, Donetsk and Luhansk, are being targeted and under attack by the rest of Ukraine. That's the same argument. So, and I don't believe it was. And my own opinion can be perfectly honest. I don't believe it was internal fighting in Transnistria. I believe it was Russia, the Russian Federation, because it's entirely possible, right? If you use the same, if you see the same logic from Russian TV about liberating Russian speakers and Russian culture, it makes a lot of sense.
which is why many analysts have started warning about the possibility of either Russian forces using Transnistria to attack Odessa from the west, or even claiming Transnistria as part of the Russian Federation. If either of these things happened, it would almost certainly provoke a reaction from Moldova. And this is particularly worrying because, well, this could in turn require a reaction from Romania, a NATO member. Romania and Moldova have an exceptionally close relationship, considering that they've been in an on and off political union since the 19th century. Many Moldovans even hold dual citizenship, and Romanians and Moldovans share common traditions, cultures, and even often language.
Yes, Moldova is a Romanian-speaking country. It's right there, right next to Romania. Culturally, they're very similar. You could consider them kind of the Australia, New Zealand of countries, or not India, Pakistan. They're very, their relationship is Australia, New Zealand, U.S. and Canada, Laos and Thailand, Belgium and France. In the past, Colombia, Venezuela. What else? Those like brother countries that help each other greatly and are very culturally similar. Romanian and Bulgarian Macedonia are a big one, a very, very big one. So, yeah, if Transnistria and Russia start fighting, it might compel Moldova to attack. And if Moldova is attacked by Russia, well, fucking NATO is getting involved because Romania is part of NATO. It would be kind of like if someone attacked Canada. Someone attacked New Zealand.
Now, we should say at this point that we think that a Russian intervention in Transnistria is unlikely.
Same. Mostly because Russian troops are not that smart. Right? Russia is not a smart country. It's very underdeveloped, very militarily underdeveloped, and it's a lot of show off. It's very much the North Korea of countries. Even North Korea is a large country. Because North Korea, and here's how North Korea works, right? They're very, very big into showing off, even though if you look at North Korea and South Korea from like an economic perspective, starting at about 1970, with a lot of when they were allowed to liberalize and really experience rapid growth like your neighbor Japan, South Korea, hold up. South Korea became an economic powerhouse when, for a time, especially in the 60s and before that, especially right after they had split in the 50s after the Korean War, where Korea was taking control, North Korea was just taken control by the Soviet Union and kind of partitioned away. South Korea was very, very poor. South Korea was very, very, very poor. For a time, the North was the rich country. But when the North closed off and South Korea developed, and then North Korea closed itself off to the world even more, and I want to say Soviet imports died off. After the Soviet imports died off when the Soviet Union broke up. Same thing happened with Cuba. The South became an even more developed country, to the point that North Koreans go to the South, and some of them go back to the North. Some of them genuinely go back to North Korea after defecting, or they'll go to China or Japan or elsewhere because South Korea is so developed. They have a really hard time fitting in. But North Korea does a lot of these like military threats and all these shows and these watch what I can do, despite them not having the ability to. You know, Russia's the same way. It's very poor, very unequal, very underdeveloped. I personally don't think this will happen, this invasion of Transnistria, but anything is possible. Let's finish the video.
Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister said on Tuesday that Russia would like to avoid a scenario in which Transnistria is dragged into the war, and the Russian army would probably struggle to do it even if they wanted to, given the number of Ukrainian forces in the east and Moldovan forces in the north. The Russian army has also faced myriad logistical issues throughout the war, and it's hard to see how they'd supply a force in Transnistria with no direct land bridge from Russia. Nonetheless, similar reasoning also applied to Ukraine, and Russia still ended up invading. And it's possible that Putin will set his sights on a weaker opposition, like Moldova or Transnistria, if he can't win in Ukraine, but still needs to claim some sort of military victory. All in all, Russian intervention in Transnistria has a non-zero probability, and this should probably worry, well, everyone, because it could end up involving a NATO member state. Anyway, if you want to be updated on this story as it plays out, and the war as a whole, as well as what we can expect from Russia next, then you'll want to subscribe.
Yeah, it's a non-zero chance, but I would still put it out. Oh, wait. Now let me watch this, then out of France.
You see this plastic tote right here? Well, I'm going to show you something right now.
This video is brought to you by our new show, The Daily Briefing. That's the show where we go through the 5 most important news stories each day, giving you a rundown of everything you need to know around the world in a matter of minutes. Watch on the separate TLDR Daily YouTube channel or listen by searching in your favourite podcast app. And if you are watching the Daily Briefing already, then you'll have heard yesterday that Russia is refocusing its war efforts in Donbass, a region which has seen tension between Russian and Ukrainian forces since 2014. So in this video, we're going to run through the latest developments, Russia's plan for the war and the region, and why Putin is trying to capture this region of Ukraine at the expense of everything else. I think we're all getting pretty familiar with the geography of Ukraine, but let me give you a really quick overview to get everyone up to speed. This is Donbass, an area in the east of Ukraine, which used to be a major coal and steel producing area. Donbass itself contains 2 regions, both of which border Russia, Donetsk and Luhansk. In part due to their historic ties and proximity to Russia, these regions are more associated with Russia than the rest of Ukraine, with things like higher approval ratings for Russia and more people speaking Russian than anywhere else in the country. As such, it's pretty widely agreed that the Kremlin has long considered the region as more a part of Russia than a part of Ukraine. In fact, even before the war, Russian separatists controlled about a third of Donbass, this section right here, which, unsurprisingly, borders Russia. They didn't hold this area peacefully, though. Since 2014, there's been a violent 8-year war between Russian separatists and Ukrainian forces in the region. Naturally, tensions have escalated significantly since the end of February, when Russia first properly invaded the country. Within just a month, Russia claimed to have captured 93% of Luhansk and 54% of Donetsk. But to this day, Putin hasn't been able to capture the region entirely, despite continued efforts. But Putin seems keen to change this, and as we detailed in our previous videos, since the beginning of April, Russia has refocused its military campaign on Donbass. Having failed to take Kiev or make much progress in the south since early March, Putin has been forced to scale down his objectives, and the Russian army is now focusing almost exclusively on Donbass in the east. On March 25th, Russia's first deputy chief of staff claimed that the first phase of the invasion was over, which apparently involved attacking Kiev to limit Ukraine's military capacity in Donbass. And by April 5th, Russian forces were nearly completely gone from northern Ukraine, and more Russian forces than ever had been deployed to Donbass. For the next 2 weeks, the Russian army basically just stopped, resupplying and regrouping in the area. In fact, on April 18th, US intelligence estimated that Russia now had 64 battalion tactical groups, or BTGs, deployed in Ukraine, up from 53 at the beginning of the month. For those of you who don't know, BTGs are the Russian Army's combined armed maneuver units, which usually comprise between 600 and 800 soldiers, accompanied by roughly 10 tanks and 40 infantry fighting vehicles. The same US intelligence briefing estimated that 12 BTGs were still tied down in Mariupol, where the Ukrainian army continues to put up resistance. This meant that all in all, Russia probably had slightly more than 50,000 troops in and around Donbass, which means that the Russian forces are unlikely to significantly outnumber the Ukrainian army, who had about 40,000 troops in the area before the war, a number which is only expected to have risen given the extra voluntary capacity that the Ukrainian army has taken on. Okay, so that's how things have evolved throughout the month, but everything kicked off properly on Monday evening, when Russia relaunched airstrikes in nearly every region of Ukraine, including Kiev and Lviv, although the shelling was apparently heaviest in Kharkiv and Mykolaiv. And there were also reports of intense shelling on the Ukrainian positions in Donbass. Just a few hours later, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announced that what he called Phase 2 of Russia's special military operation had officially begun. The Ukrainian army then reported intensified Russian ground attacks around towns in the north of Donetsk, as well as coming from the west of Luhansk, which is basically the only part of Luhansk that's yet to be taken by the Russian army. Luhansk's governor stated that Russian forces were able to capture Crimea, but had failed to make any significant gains elsewhere in the region. Further north, Ukrainian forces staged successful counteroffensives in the southeast of Kharkiv, with Ukrainian forces then successfully moving westwards. There were also reports of Ukrainian counteroffensives to the west of Izium, then pushing up further in the region. Most analysts think that Ukrainians are now trying to encircle the Russian forces at Izium, which would limit Russia's ability to perform the much-anticipated pincer movement around Ukrainian forces in Donbass. Russia apparently has about 22 BTGs in and around Izium, which would amount to about a third of its total force in the area. Therefore, the entire Russian force pretty much relies on supplies shipped from Belgorod. So if Ukrainian forces can interrupt their supply lines, they'll effectively be able to incapacitate a significant fraction of the Russian army.
A former Goldman Sachs PhD says, we are never returning to normal. A strange phenomenon is distorting America's financial system. If you listen to the mainstream media, you think a new crash is imminent. But today, former Goldman Sachs
In summary, Russia has begun its much-anticipated Donbass offensive, but hasn't yet made significant gains, while Ukrainian forces have successfully staged counterattacks around Izium. So what happens next? Well, things don't look that great for Russia. If US intelligence is to be believed, then Russia only has a maximum of 60,000 troops in Donbass, definitely not enough to guarantee victory. Traditionally, military analysts assume a defending force has a 3-to-1 advantage over an attacker, which means that Russia would need more than twice as many troops to match the 40,000 defending Ukrainians. Numbers aside, whether Russia can pull this off will depend on three things, with the first one being Mariupol. If the Russian army can successfully take Mariupol, then that will free up some 10,000 spare troops to help out in the rest of Donbass. The second front is Izium. As we just mentioned, 22 Russian BTGs are currently stationed there. So if Ukrainians can cut off their supplies from Belgorod, or even encircle them, then Russia's army will be seriously depleted. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly though, are logistics. As we detailed in other videos, the Russian army has been beset by logistical problems. Before the invasion even began, military experts estimated that Russia would struggle for supplies any further than 90 miles from their nearest supply dump. And the Ukrainians know this, which is why they've consistently targeted Russian supply trucks. It's no coincidence then that so far, the Russian army has struggled to occupy territory further than 90 miles from the Russian or Crimean border, at any point in the conflict, at any point on the border. So if the Russians want to take all of Donbass, they'll need to significantly improve their logistics operations. All in all, things don't look great for Putin here on all three fronts. But this is a good and a bad thing for Ukraine. While it does make a conventional Russian victory less likely, it also increases the chances of some sort of non-conventional escalation, like a tactical nuke or chemical weapons attack. So, if you want to be updated on this story, how the Russian assault on Donbass plays out,
And then this last one is from France.
How can you go from a Christian making 6 figures a year to a kingdom builder making 6 figures a month? Better question is, what would you do with that kind of wealth? How much could you sow back into the kingdom? What kind of life could you set up for your kids and your great-grandkids? Hey, my name's Paul Bacco. I've built 10 different businesses. The first few were train wrecks. The next ones were 6 figures. The last 3 have been 7 figures. And now we give more in his name every month than we used to make in a year. But it wasn't easy, and it took having a backbone. The kind of backbone that has thousands of Christians standing up against the wrongs being done to not only you and me, not only against our kids, but against our great-grandkids, stripping us of our God-given right to choose what is right or wrong for us, our freedom to worship, and have God in our homes, schools, and justice systems. If you're anything...
After weeks of speculation, opinion polls, and discussion, it finally happened. The French presidential election came to a close. And while the result isn't exactly a surprise, there's more to the election than might meet the eye. Having won 58% of the vote, Macron will be staying in power for the next 5 years, but it might not be as plain sailing as you first thought.
Yup. This is an interesting election. Namely because of one thing, maybe he'll address it later. France, for a number of years, probably at least 60, had two main political parties, like everywhere else in the world. The Republicans and the Socialists. Right wing and left wing. For most of French history, and the French have only been able to vote directly for the president since about 1958. And that was when Charles de Gaulle created the Fifth Republic, which is currently France. Since then, it's been one of two parties that have become the president. This last election, this last one in 2022, neither of them got anywhere near a viable amount. Hell, they combined got like 7%, which is a major blow to how they work. A major blow to how they work and what the future will be. So maybe we'll talk about that, but that was an interesting thing that happened. The main parties only got a combined like 7%. If you do well enough in an election in France, you actually get your campaign fees reimbursed to you, you get them given back to you. And that didn't even happen, so let's get on.
Nor might it be 5 more years of the same old Macron. So in this video, we'll take a deeper look at France's post-election and what Macron's win actually means for France and for Europe. We actually first discussed this topic in yesterday's edition of the Daily Briefing, where we spoke to Le Monde's Eric Albert about the results of the election and what's to come. So if you want to stay up to date, then check out the show, because it's where we discuss the biggest stories and some that have slipped under the radar every single day. You can watch the Daily Briefing on its dedicated YouTube channel, or you can listen along by searching for the podcast in your preferred app. First things first though, let's get the actual results out of the way. According to early estimates available at the time of writing, Emmanuel Macron managed to surpass most polling predictions, garnering some 58% of the vote, with the far-right Marine Le Pen attracting just 42%. So Macron managed to get an easy win. Job done, right? Well, no, not exactly. The first thing to say here is that the sheer scale of Macron's achievement can't be understated. Macron joins just 3 other presidents to be re-elected while in office: Charles de Gaulle, François Mitterrand, and Jacques Chirac. And even then, Macron's re-election is the first time a president has been re-elected while holding a majority in the French parliament. I.e., as the BBC put it, Emmanuel Macron is the first president in modern times who, after running every aspect of foreign and domestic policy for a full term, has once again won the trust of the people, and won their trust in spite of being bitterly controversial. On the foreign policy side, though, it goes without saying that Europe has breathed a sigh of relief. Macron has consistently been one of, if not the most Europhile of all of the candidates running for presidency, while Le Pen sought to, among other things, cut French contributions to the EU budget, renegotiate French membership of the Schengen area, and re-establish the primacy of French law over EU law. Across the EU then, Macron has been seen as somewhat of a leading light for more Europe, and for further, faster integration between member states. Having Le Pen in the driving seat then would have sent a shiver down the EU spine, for the main reason that Europe remains based on a Franco-German axis. What France and Germany say and do together becomes more or less gospel for the European Union. These two countries are ultimately the 2 largest economies. They're founding members, and they've played an undeniably large part in the history of European integration. A Le Pen victory would have almost immediately thrown France back into political gridlock, with the French president and prime minister drawn from separate political parties, known as cohabitation.
Hello there, ladies. Doing the laundry blows, am I right? Unless you have a 50-inch chest like mine around. In that case, I do the blowing myself. But you know what's even more impressive than my billowing breath? These funny-looking strips I just used instead of my old laundry detergent.
Anyway, in his victory speech, Macron acknowledged that much of the support he got in the second round wasn't as much a vote for him as a vote against Le Pen and the far right, something that a number of commentators picked up on. Ken-Schmucky, an expert in populism, highlighted on Twitter that probably the most important aspect of the campaign, and missed in many accounts, is that in 2017 Macron won with a positive message, inspiring many French and even more Europeans. This wasn't the case in 2022 though. It was even more an anti-Le Pen vote which won the election for him.
Wait. This is the highlight. Wait, where is it?
Usually in an election you got
Vote, which
Yes. This is where this guy's fucking underlined. Sunday was an anti-Le Pen vote to end an anti-Le Pen vote. Right. They, and by they I mean French establishment, the piece of shit, boring party that don't win elections in France anymore, and the third place guy were like, fuck this shit, and they were very much anti-Le Pen. I'm gonna come back to this later, but with Le Pen, they were worried about her ties to Russia, her ties to the EU. I mean, her anti-EU ties, her ties to Putin, I think, and they didn't want that in the middle of the war with Ukraine. But there were some Le Pen strongholds in France, namely, the north of France and the Caribbean. No shit, the Caribbean. So with France, if you see a map of the world, right, and I can pull one up right now. I have one over here. It's not like America, where the territories of the U.S. are, territories that can't vote. Some of these islands, like Martinique, Guadeloupe, whatever, are still France. They're legally part of France, and they won the elections. And these were some of the strongest Le Pen strongholds on the entire French continent. I think Guadeloupe was something like 60-something% for Le Pen. It was because they didn't feel Macron represented them. So in the first round, they voted for the third place guy, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. And when he did not get the second round, they voted against Le Pen as a protest vote. So now, you figure out what's next in 5 years, and that'll be that. Because Macron's term, he can't run again. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, to close out today is the NFL draft. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-dun-dun. And here's a story from the NFL draft about people needing to shut the fuck up. So with the NFL draft, if you're new to American football or you don't understand it, there's rounds. So first round is, very selected until you get to days of the fucking draft, and you get to the seventh round. That's the last one. And in total, there's probably 250 or so picks in the draft. And of those 250, the closer you get to the end of the draft, the least likely it is you will get anywhere in the league. You may see a practice squad. You may not even get fucking signed, honestly. There are some odd seventh round like stunners, like Tom Brady was picked seventh in the seventh round, and he's fucking Tom Brady. But here's a draft pick that made me think that everyone needed to shut the fuck up about like the culture war shit. I think it was 2014. There was a guy drafted for the. I think he was from. I have an article right here. Missouri, named Michael Sam. And Michael Sam was the first open to gay football player. Which a lot of people back, this was 2014 or so, they were not happy about, I guess. A lot of people didn't care. I don't. And you know why it made me think people need to shut the fuck up? Because of of let me see how many places there are. 249th out of 256. That's ninth to last. Two 149th place. You know what that means? You know what that means? When, despite all this culture war shit people are afraid about, it means, realistically, you may see some practice squad. Like, in the NFL, there's a practice squad, so for the preseason. And a lot of players get cut before the main season. And honestly, if your draft, they get cut before the preseason if they need to turn on the roster from like 90-ish to 50-ish. If you're drafted ninth to last, you know what that means? It means you really had no chance to begin with. That you're not that good, but you're good enough to maybe get a shot. Maybe get a shot on an NFL team. But all these people back in 2014 were like, he's going to ruin the game. And if he's drafted this low, he's not even gonna play the fucking game. It's another example of people making him out out of fucking molehills and thinking they're doing something right, which they aren't. You know? It's kind of funny, to be honest. But it's also very sad. You know? I don't know if I'll be watching much of the draft. I like the suit, I guess. And before I go, I was gonna say something. Since it's closing this week because it had fucking 5 subscribers. RIP to CNN Plus. We hardly knew you. May flight failures lead you to thy rest, I guess. But as I said before, if I said it last week, CNN Plus it's a sign, right? So I think here's a good analogy, right? When the Protestant reformers, when they split from the Catholic Church in the 15th century, 16th century, you had your Luther, John Calvin, Melanchthon, Philip Melanchthon, Zwingli, King Henry VIII, who split from the church in various places, like Geneva, Wittenberg, France, England, and all of these people wanted to do their own thing instead of reforming Catholic Church. So, differing views, their own views on where you get doctrine of the faith. You get it from, like the Catholic view is scripture and tradition, but the Protestant view is tradition is mostly scripture because it came after the printing press, and it was as part of the five main tenets of the Protestant faith. Do you, instead of a central head, have local elders around, the country? And when you bring, and when you have, a more decentralized system of governance, like the elders or like a local council in the Protestant church, you have a lot of splits. You have people who take things to the, their own initiative and start a different denomination. In England, you had, the Puritans, who thought the Church of England was too liturgical, too Catholic, like to sit, stand, kneel, hooray, go by. And in protest, they were exiled to the colonies. Those Puritans became the Congregationalists. And the Congregationalists were influenced in New England colonies to become the Unitarians and split off from the Congregationalists. The Unitarians were influenced by Enlightenment theology, Enlightenment thinking, really. And as a result, they denied the divinity of Christ and became a religion focused on the one God. Like the one singular God. Unity is one, right? And those Unitarianism in general, became a hotbed of American religion for a very long time, influencing even the Harvard Divinity School. The Harvard Divinity School, for a very long time in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was Unitarian. Many presidents were Unitarian. It was a very big presence in the U.S. until about 1900, where other denominations started taking precedence, like the German Lutherans, the Episcopalians, which is the Anglican Church in the U.S. And by the time you get to like 1960, the Unitarians are dwindling, and they merge with the Universalists. And Universalism, like Christian theology, is a Christian idea of this idea that all men are going to heaven, like that there is really no hell. And then you had what became today the Unitarian Universalists, or how the Protestants in Scotland, when the Reformation happened, they split. So you had a Scottish church loyal to the crown that became the Scottish Episcopal Church, and one that wasn't, that became the Presbyterian, or the Church of Scotland. CNN Plus is like those splits, because you start to get a little bit of overcrowdedness with, in one case, denominations, in one case, streaming services. CNN Plus's own fucking problem is that there's way too many streaming services. The people who left cable for streaming services are now back to cable. And what do I mean by that? All of these that add up are a fucking cable membership. Especially if you buy the one that allows you to get, like, live sports, that's cable membership. So, that's CNN Plus's own fucking fault. Along with, like, kind of current attitude of, the world. So, goodbye. You're a fucking mistake. Should have never happened. It just means they learn. Probably not. And